Chair, it's just a little bit past 5:30 now, and we do have quorum if you wanted to start.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, let's get going then. So good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you very much for joining us in this evening's Planning Advisory Committee meeting. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed to you via YouTube, and the meeting recording will also be uploaded to the city's agenda and minutes portal after the meeting. I received regrets from just one member Huang. Before we get started, I'll just ask the committee coordinator to call the roll, please. So members in Zoom, if you could just please unmute yourselves for a moment while your name is called. Thanks very much.
Member Ball? Here. Member Burgraff?
Here.
Member Huang, Member Karakassis? Member Lenk?
Here.
Member Nuruddin? Member Rivet?
Present.
Member Roberts?
Here.
Member Sun? And Member White?
Here.
Chair Mackenzie?
Okay, thank you. The first item is notices and meeting information for meeting participants and the public. I don't believe that we have anything with respect to that item. No, shaking of head. Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations for this meeting from members? No. Okay. Seeing none, we'll go to the third item, which is just confirmation of the minutes from February 22nd, 2024. Are the meetings confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Not hearing any any objections to that. Thank you. We'll confirm those. Now on to, I guess, the substantive part of the meeting. So committee items, we have election, actually sort of a procedural before we get on to the couple of staff presentations. Election of the vice chair. Members may be aware that member Hunter resigned earlier this year. And accordingly, we'll need to appoint a new vice chair for the committee. I'm going to invite Robert to lead the process for the election of the vice chair, please. Robert?
Madam Chair, basically, you can open it to the floor to anyone that is interested. They can put their name forward. If only one member of the committee is interested, then we would just acclaim them in a form of a motion. If more than one member is interested, we would have to have a vote, and based on open meeting procedures, we would just call a vote until we had a selected member. So at this time, if you wanted to open the floor to nominations, we could do that. And what we will do is dovetail the term of the vice chair to match yours to February 2025.
Okay, so with that, I'll open the floor. Don't be shy. Any nominations from the floor for the vice chair? Anyone at all? It's only a couple of meetings a year. Not that onerous. I'd love to have someone put their hand up at this point and come forward to fill that role.
If I could just say, I would be interested eventually, but not right away, because I don't have a lot of experience. This is only my second meeting, so I have a lot to learn still. So I feel very much like I have a green thumb, unfortunately. I don't have the expertise required.
Yeah, fair enough. Colin, Member White, did I see your hand up?
Madam Chair, I'd be prepared to volunteer. I do have some experience with the committee adjustment and some long experience in the planning department of the city. So I'd be prepared to put my name forward, Vice Chair.
Terrific. Are there any other nominations from the floor before we move forward then? Okay, seeing none, Robert, do you want to guide us on how we complete this task?
Yeah, just a motion to confirm the acclamation of Member White to vice chair for a mandate until February 2025. If there's a mover for that.
I so move.
Oh, and maybe not from the chair, but Member Rivet had his hand up.
Oh, okay, yes, thank you.
And then if you can just call the vote.
Okay, I'll call the vote then. In support of that motion,
Approved.
everyone, hands up, yeah. Okay, I think we can consider that approved, and thank you very much for stepping forward.
Madam Chair, just one quick note. There's a
Yeah.
member in the attendees called Church Ottawans, and we don't have, that doesn't match to a member, but they had their hand up. So I don't know if that,
Oh,
if they can hear me, if they can rename themselves their name, and then Melanie and myself can move that person to the panelist list if we can confirm that is an actual member.
okay,
Just to put that as a note for you.
make a note of that, yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, so moving ahead to the main part of the meeting, really, and we're going to get moving ahead with the update to the 2024 new zoning bylaw. I'll now ask that staff provide an overview of this item. After the slide presentation, members will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff and to provide comments. And we have two staff presenters here this evening. I see Carol Ruddy, who's the program manager, of course, for zoning and intensification, and Tim Rowe, I believe, yes, you're there as well, strategic programs and project officer. So I'll hand it over to you, Carol and Tim. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. We also have Royce Fu, who's the manager of policy planning. So Royce is with us here tonight as well to speak to official plan issues. So welcome, everybody. I'm happy to again be here with you to talk about the new zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. So tonight we'll do another overview of the project timelines just to refresh you. We'll talk a little bit about the consultation that we've taken to date. So just a brief overview, a refresh about what the zoning bylaw is doing and the official plan. And then we're going to, in the item 4 is an overview of the key issues that we've received feedback on as part of our public consultations. And for these key issues, which are very impactful issues, we're going to be developing options in our report that's going as part of draft 2 in March of next year. Options for council's consideration in terms of the directions that they'd like to go in on those key issues. So next slide, please. So here are project timelines. Earlier this year, April 29th, it feels like a long time ago because we've done so much work since then, but we had a joint committee meeting and we had a lengthy report. We presented in that report an overview of what was coming in the draft zoning bylaw. It's a very detailed report. If you want to refer to it, it'll give you a complete overview of the draft 1 of the zoning bylaw, the rationale for the provisions, and supporting documents. Then on May 31st of this year, we released the first draft of the zoning bylaw and the zoning map on our Engage Ottawa page. June through October of this year, we have active consultations. Actually, they continued through November. Our staff are busy right now at their desks, trying to take everything that we've received in comments from the public and continue to receive. We're receiving actually the most detailed comments that we've received to date at this time. And there are a lot of, we're receiving a lot of comments. Earlier in this fall, we were behind in our comments. So if you heard from residents or if you provided comments yourself and didn't get a response, yes, we were behind. But we are catching up now. I think we're pretty much up to date with the comments that we're receiving, except that the comments that we are receiving are multiple pages about many properties. And so it takes some time to respond to those types of comments. All of the work we're doing right now is in terms of revision. There's all the track changes that we've got in draft 1 of the bylaw, or will be released as draft 2. In March of next year, and there'll be another report that'll provide an overview of the changes. This time the report will be much shorter and the supporting documents will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting and presenting what's changed. Then in 2025, we're going to have March through September, another public consultation period. Our public consultations, really, we would hope to receive substantive comments by August 1st, because we have very tight turnaround times to bring that draft 3 to council for approval at the end of the year. So there we are at the end on the far right, December 2025, the final draft of the zoning bylaws due at council. Next slide, please. So public consultation it's been ongoing all year. We had on June 20th, a citywide virtual session that was quite well attended with over 300 people. We had 8 ward specific virtual sessions in the summer extending into September. And at each of those 8 virtual sessions, we had a breakout room for each ward. And then following that, we had 5 in-person open houses in various locations in the city. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm just going to jump into, and I think that given your interest in planning, that going into a lot of detail about the official plan is probably not, it's something that you know about already, but I'll just run through these slides and I'll try and go as fast as I can to get to bring us really up to date to where we are right now with the options that we're looking at for the key issues. But probably, as you all know, the official plan sets the framework for the zoning bylaw, and the zoning bylaw implements the objectives and policies of the official plan by establishing legally enforceable regulations. So there at the top is the Ontario Planning Act of our inverted triangle, then the provincial It Should Be Planning Statement now, then the City of Ottawa official plan, and then there the implementing document, the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. Key directions in the official plan. There were many new policies concerning the densities that we need to achieve to get the number of dwelling units that are forecast to be needed. So those densities, there are density targets and requirements in Part 3 of the official plan. There are requirements in our hubs and corridors and targets for the neighborhoods. Another key direction in the official plan was trying to maintain our urban forest tree canopy at 40% citywide. So we've got various provisions we've been looking at to try and achieve that as in particular as infill development occurs. We committed to consulting on 4 units per lot as part of our Housing Accelerator Fund application. So draft 1 included minimum densities to permit 4 units per lot, assuming that you can, of course, meet your yard setbacks and you're not exceeding the maximum height. We committed to implementing as much as we can the as of right permissions and secondary plans, and this is in particular paying really close attention to maximum building heights and secondary plans and making sure that they're implemented in the zoning bylaw. And this is I would say this is 10 miles deep, that work. Staff are combing through secondary plans, trying to catch all of the provisions that need to be implemented. It is very detailed work. That work may have to continue through 2025 following the second draft, release of the second draft. Something new that's important to note is the new requirements for stormwater management in Section 201 of the draft zoning bylaw. And this is really important nuts and bolts types of zoning work to make sure that we have orderly planning as redevelopment occurs in the city for development that is not subject to site plan control, so 10 units and less. So we have new provisions to cover that. There are no parking minimums proposed in the draft zoning bylaw. And for the rural zones, because the rural policies and the rural secondary plans, generally speaking, just remember, they remain status quo in the new official plan. There aren't a lot of big policy changes in direction for the new zoning bylaw to implement. However, we are undertaking some streamlining of provisions and clarifications of provisions for rural zones, and those will appear in the second draft of the zoning bylaw. Next slide. All right, so I think you've all heard about the growth we're expecting. These numbers don't reflect the Ministry of Finance numbers. These are the numbers based on the growth management strategy and the official plan. But all to say, we've got a lot of demand or supply needed for housing for our growing population. on the order of, well, anywhere. It's almost, we originally planned for about an extra 400,000 increase in population to 2046, and now Ministry of Finance numbers are considerably higher than that. And that's an official plan issue right now. The zoning bylaw will attempt to maintain conformity with the directions in the provincial planning statement regarding those Ministry of Finance potential to achieve the numbers of dwelling units for the Ministry of Finance numbers. We certainly will have a lot of capacity. Really, the issue is, can the industry build that much over that period of time? Because the permissions will be there in the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. So this map illustrates the density strategy in the official plan, and the darker the color, the higher the density. So you can see the dark purple, you're probably all familiar with the hub and corridor designations. And then abutting those, there's a lighter sort of rosy red color. Those are the areas affected by the evolving neighborhood overlay, where more compact forms of development at higher densities are directed in the official plan. The lightest yellow colors are, generally speaking, the neighborhood designation, where we see those densities ranging from 40 to 60, upwards of 80 to 120, depending on the transect that you're in. Next slide, please. And I should have mentioned, those numbers I'm referring are units per hectare. So at the neighborhood level, here's a diagram that illustrates the strategy in the official plan. Along those top edges of our square there, though we could think of that as a corridor designation, and immediately abutting it in the red, a dashed line is the evolving neighborhood overlay. And then the area outside of the dashed red line is the interior of a neighborhood. So inside that red area in the evolving neighborhood overlay, we need to create the potential for higher densities and a more compact building form and a little bit higher heights to a maximum of 4 stories. And then in the interiors of neighborhoods, the official plan is directing us to do a more context-sensitive approach to development, where we try and replicate the envelope that's in the current zoning bylaw for the current residential zones, but allow higher densities within that envelope. Next slide, please. So we have supporting master plans to make sure that we've got the servicing and infrastructure in place, and the transportation systems and parks and recreation facilities in place as the city grows. And those are our supporting master plans to the official plan, which should be, taking the direction from the official plan in terms of the densities and population we have to provide for, and making sure that the infrastructure is there for that growing population. Next slide. So making room for trees, there are a variety of provisions proposed in draft 1. One of them is the alternative setbacks, which are illustrated here. So if you want to move your building a little bit one way or another, there's relief in the bylaw built in to allow you to do that, so that you don't need a minor variance. There are also new minimum soft landscaping requirements in front and rear yards. As part of the Bill 23 amendments, for the first time, we implemented or introduced minimum rear yard landscaping requirements, and we are trying to build on those in the draft bylaw. And then we also have provisions for underground parking structures to limit the extent that they can project to the property line to maintain some space for tree roots, so we can get a tree to grow to maturity. And there's a tension there for sure, in both in terms of what's ultra viris and what's intra viris, in terms of what zoning can do with regard to regulating soil volumes, for example. And so we are facing challenges in that regard. And as well, for the minimum soft landscaping requirements, there are tensions there as well, for just trying to figure out how to make sure that we are making enough room for trees and trying to balance all the other functional aspects on a lot. Next slide, please. So removal of parking minimums has been interesting for people to try and get their heads around. We always like to say that it doesn't mean that parking won't be provided. It just means that it's a choice-based approach. A key message in the information that we've provided so far about our proposal for Minuteman parking has been that we've overlooked, and that's really making sure that people understand the extent to which parking is not currently required by the current zoning bylaw, because there are a lot of circumstances in many locations in the city right now where it's not required, and chaos has not ensued in the streets. And then as a result of changes to the Planning Act, sort of building in on where it's currently not required in the city and under our current zoning bylaw, as a result of Bill 185, the provincial government changed the Planning Act to say that we cannot require parking in certain locations in municipalities, protected major transit station areas and areas with higher order transit. So we'll be presenting that information as part of a complete picture about where parking can't legally be required by a municipality and where it is currently not required, just sort of to flesh out that picture. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of information about our residential zones right now in 2008-250. There are over 140 residential zones and subzones. And if you break that down into the number of separate standards within those zones and subzones, there are over 500. And we have 17 pages of zone provisions for residential zones. So over the years, all of these provisions have increased and increased and increased. And we've gotten to the point where, it's as a tool as a regulatory document, the zoning bylaw is not very efficient right now. Efficient in the sense that it is very difficult to implement. And so we're really working hard to try and simplify those provisions. So next slide, please. So we've taken all of those separate standards and streamlined them into 6 neighborhood zones. The first 4, N1 through N4, are low-rise zones of increasing density. N5 is our mid-rise zone, and N6 is our high-rise zone. All of those provisions are included in section 801 right now in the draft. And they include the yard setbacks and the maximum permitted densities and maximum building heights. The subzones really are the lifting part of establishing that building envelope. And so they set the setbacks and the maximum building height. And the densities, or rather the setbacks, and then the primary zones look after the density and the maximum building height. In section 802 right now, we have built form standards, which include our rear yard setbacks, our building depth, building fenestration, and articulation requirements. And we've heard a lot of comments about those provisions, and we are revising them in response to those comments. And then in section 803, we have our site functional standards, which deal with waste management, and our front and rear yard soft landscaping. Next slide, please. So these are the primary zones, and it's just this is a different way to organizing zoning provisions than the current zoning bylaw. So if you haven't been sort of thinking about these and looking at them for the last year or so, or since earlier this year when they were released, it might be a bit unusual. But as I said, the primary zones establish your building height and your density. And so right now the densities, or rather the maximum building heights in N1, N2, N3, they go 8.5 in both N1 and N2. Then we go up to 11 meters in N3, 14.5 in N4, and then we go up to mid-rise and then high-rise for N5 and N6. Now it's really, just remember, you're familiar with looking at the zoning map. That's not the end of the story about the maximum building height provisions. We have height suffixes in many zones. And so across the city, you're going, and in the primary zones, you're going to see a mixture of heights. And then the maximum densities go up as you go upwards by the number of the zone. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and a lot of comments from the public being their concern about these densities being higher than the targets in the official, in table 3B. And the reason that they're higher is that we need a little bit higher, or we need higher density on a per lot basis to reach the overall area-wide densities in those targets in table 3B. So we'll have a few more slides about this, and we can talk a little bit about more detail, and you can ask questions after the presentation. So we'll just go to the next slide, please. So here we'll talk a little bit about density. So here's a single unit on a lot that's 15 by 30 meters. And when you have one unit on a lot of that size, you have 22 units per hectare. If you divide that building up into 6 units on the same size lot, you get 130 units per hectare. So next slide, please. So if we look at a block, and this block on each side, each of these blocks illustrated is 1 hectare. And on this block, there are 22 on the left. We'll look first at the left block. We have 22 lots, and there's 1 unit on each lot. And so we have a density of 22 units per hectare. And that's lower than the lowest density target in the official plan for neighborhoods. Okay, so let's look at the second block on the right. This block sort of illustrates the sort of turnover rate that we would expect in a block over the next 25 years. The turnover rate is just to be perfectly clear, is the rate at which lots are redeveloped with new development over time. And here we have 3 lots that have been redeveloped over 25 years in this 1 hectare block. We have 1 that's gone to 6 units and 2 that have gone to 12 units. And when you add up those extra units, you wind up with 49 units in this block. And this 1 hectare block then has a density of 49 units per hectare. So you can see that when you have a relatively few number of lots turning over 25 years, if you want to reach the area-wide density by the horizon date for the official plan and achieve those numbers of units that we're looking for, you need to have densities that are higher than the area-wide average density that's referred to in table 3B. So next slide, please. So here are the subzones, and really all of this work is Robert Sandercott. Robert is the lead for the neighborhood zones. He refers to these as looking after neighborhood character because these establish that envelope. So the envelope should remain generally the same in the interiors of neighborhoods where the evolving overlay applies. The official plan directs that a larger envelope is, and more more compact yards are that's the direction that we're supposed to be going in, and higher densities. And so in the evolving overlay, the envelope is not going to be matching the existing. So you can see the setbacks as we go on the from A through F. A is the most urban or most compact form of subzone, and then F is that most suburban where you have the largest lots and the biggest setbacks. So next slide, please. Okay, so I hope I've given you enough to ask some questions at the end about neighborhood zones, and happy to discuss that further in the questions. We'll just switch now to non-residential uses in neighborhoods. And really overall in the city, in the new zoning bylaw, how we're providing for non-residential uses in those 15-minute neighborhood uses in proximity to where people live. We have a continuum of permissions, starting with home-based business provisions. So those are the businesses that are permitted in association with the residential use in the home. Then we have a neighborhood commercial suffix, which adds as of right permissions for certain small-scale non-residential uses like little coffee shops and little retail stores. Then we have our new neighborhood mixed use zone. And this zone takes the former local commercial or the current local commercial and general mixed use zones, and where they occur in neighborhoods, converts them into this neighborhood, those local commercial and GM zones into this new neighborhood mixed use zone, which in the zone code is NMU. NMU carries forward the rights of those former LC and GM zones. And then in the N5 and N6 zones, we've permitted non-residential uses at ground level in mid and high-rise buildings. So at the ground floor and the basement of those buildings. In 2008-250, the current zoning bylaw right now, there is a real sort of mixed bag of permissions already in effect for our mid and high-rise buildings in our current residential zones. And so we're just broadening those permissions, and this is really to support or to implement the official plan directions about trying to get more uses in proximity to residents to have those 15-minute neighborhoods that that strong theme in the current official plan. And then we have a new minor corridor zone that implements the minor corridor designation in the official plan. I believe there are 86 minor corridors designated in the official plan. Some of them are existing TM zones, and some of them are just currently residential zones. We did the best we could to implement minor corridor zoning in those areas. It is tough when the corridor includes extensive stretches of subdivisions that back on to the minor corridor or have a 30-centimeter reserve. But where we could and where we made sense, we tried to implement those minor corridor zones and that is to support those policies in the official plan about 15-minute neighborhoods. The next slide, please. So we'll move on to the mixed use zones. So Jeff Nadeau is the lead for these provisions. So in the slide, he talks about, our key direction is simplifying hub and corridor zones. We have taken quite a layer or multi-zone framework and simplified them into, our hub and Main Street zones. Through these zones, we need to make sure that we implement the policies in the secondary plans and we remain in conformity with them. And as I said, the secondary planning framework is extremely layered and complex. And so we're doing the best we can to cast a net and make sure that we're remaining in conformity with those secondary plans. And then implementation of that minor corridor designation is through the application of that new CM zone. Next slide, please. So the height strategy for our hubs and corridors is really dependent on the heights that are specified in secondary plans. Those heights supersede the heights of the primary zones for hubs and corridors. And so this slide just really illustrates the extent to which that our planning framework does of our primary plan in many cases is superseded in many significant growth areas in the city by those secondary plan documents. And given the age of some of them, there are some sort of policies that are slightly, well, they are out of step. These secondary plans could be as more than 20, they could be 20 years old. And so there is some work to do on the secondary plans. And I know that Royce can speak to this, but the official plan team is certainly thinking about making sure that those secondary plans are brought up to date. Next slide, please. So I have a lot of slides about the rural zones. Can someone put their hand? Is there anyone from the rural area here? Did you put up your hand? Oh, okay, wonderful. Okay, well, so as I said, the rural policies didn't change that much significantly. So we are working on trying to clarify those provisions as part, as the most that we can do at this time until work is done on, for example, the consolidated villages secondary plans, policies. So we're, basically the rural zones were carried forward pretty much unchanged. There were formatting changes to try and clarify, as I said, in draft one. We're going quite a few steps further and trying to simplify the provisions in draft 2. So there will be changes to how the provisions look, but the intent will remain the same. So next slide, please. So this just outlines the rural zones that'll, minimal changes, certainly in terms of intent, and this is because the policies themselves did not change. Next slide, please. Something new that affects the rural area to a great extent because of the number of water courses are the setbacks from surface water features. This is a conformity exercise with the new policies in the official plan. The policies for surface water features in the official plan introduce new definitions for top of bank, for example, and this really, the significance of it is that it changes where we measure watercourse setbacks from, and it generally has resulted in a bigger setback, I guess, which is from a resiliency perspective is something that I get, from a climate change perspective is probably a good thing, but really chiefly the purpose of these provisions is to try and maintain water quality. And something new with these provisions is that we've introduced schedules that implement the council approved sub-watershed studies. And so those sub-watershed studies may have had alternative setbacks that may be greater than 30 meters or less than 30 meters. And so we finally have those implemented in a zoning schedule, and which is, basically increases the accuracy of implementation, and it achieves a more, I want to say genuine or accurate implementation of intent of the official plan by having these alternative setbacks for certain water courses. And I just really want to emphasize that, as with the current provisions for watercourse setbacks, the watercourse setbacks provisions in the draft zoning bylaw include those provisions that say when you're going through plan of subdivision or site plan control, you negotiate your watercourse setbacks through those processes. So the alternative setbacks in the schedules and the standard 15 and 30 meter setbacks apply to as of right applications for building permits. Next slide, please. So the mineral aggregate overlay, once again, the policies changed in the official plan. The official plan introduced an overlay approach, but the intent didn't really change that much. However, it did necessitate that the zoning bylaw take a different approach. We had to implement an overlay for our mineral aggregate resource designation. And this is because the policies in the official plan direct us to revert back to the underlying designation. So whether it's agricultural resource area or rural countryside, for those lands within that are affected by the mineral aggregate overlay in the official plan, if they aren't currently in a mineral extraction zone with a license. So we've had quite a bit of mapping work and effort put into just making sure that we implement that direction in the official plan, but the intent remains the same. The policies in, the provincial planning statement are very strong in protecting aggregate extraction. And so, the official plan maintains that intent, and the zoning bylaw will as well. Next slide, please. I think I've already covered this, and we'll just go on the next slide. So rural industrial logistics, we have new designations, and we needed to reflect those new designations with our RIL, rural industrial logistics zone, and you'll see those new areas around interchanges. You'll also see the RIL zone used in the CARP corridor because it is an employment area now for Planning Act and provincial planning statement purposes. So that's what happened with that designation. It's a conformity exercise where we've developed zone to implement the policies for the rural industrial logistics for the designations in the official plan. Next slide, please. For the rural residential zones, once again, we have to carry forward all of these permissions to recognize all of these subdivisions that were approved by the former municipalities prior to amalgamation and since amalgamation by the city. And so we've just carried on with those. However, they are going to look differently in the draft 2, but we'll be making sure that we are not going to be creating non-compliance with the approach that we're taking with our rural residential zones. Next slide, please. The village zones, once again, it's carry forward. We did try and convert the residential provisions away from a typology base. So typology meaning, using terms like detached dwelling and semi-detached dwelling. We just refer to 1 unit or 2 units being permitted in a zone. That's really, the extent that any changes will go in terms of those village zones, because when the secondary plans have not been revised. Next slide, please. Now, the environmental protection zones, there's been just many, many, many months of work done on trying to bring the boundaries of our EP zones to match the new boundaries in the official plan. So it's extremely detailed work. It's like tiny slivers, many, many, many slivers of these irregular shaped parcels. And so that work's ongoing, and it may be ongoing right until next year when we finally bring draft 3 through to council for approval. But the point is that we need to match the OP boundaries, and so there shouldn't be any surprises about where those boundaries are for the EP zones. They match the boundaries in the official plan. Next slide, please. All right, so this year the zoning team brought 2 updates to Planning and Housing Committee in documents called Information Previously Distributed. And so those documents go in the form of a memo to Planning and Housing Committee, and they're on the agenda and they're received for information. And it's just our way of trying to keep Planning and Housing Committee and Council and the public up to date with what we've been hearing. And so the information that we provided in these IPDs was, to identify these key issues that we've been hearing about in our public consultations. The first IPD was in September. The second was in December. I think that they were shared with your committee, and I hope that you will receive them for your information. But the December IPD included the most details. Here are the issues that were identified: minimum parking rates in villages, maximum driveway width in villages. We heard from rural councillors who, have subdivisions, for example, in Richmond, where the built form is very compact, and not just the built form, but the street network and the whole thing about how the subdivision has been designed. Some of the issues that are a problem in these neighborhoods where they're experiencing, problems with parking, not enough parking, on-street parking on the street that's not working, are related to zoning. Some of them are related to zoning. Those subdivisions happen to have exceptions that allowed yards to be shrunk and so on, and setbacks from garages to be reduced, which reduce the numbers of parking spaces available on the lot. But we are really taking seriously the comments that we're receiving and considering changes to both the minimum parking rates for villages and the driveway widths. Issue number 3, maximum building height in the N1, N2 zones. It really is a question of how we set the heights in the primary zones. What we inadvertently did is we really reduce the maximum height that's permitted in the suburbs inadvertently. So I think what we did is set the maximum height in N1, N2 at 8.5. When you really look at the zoning map in detail, you see almost all maximum heights in suburbs are 11. It wasn't our intention to downzone them. So we just have to sort out a way to fix that and recognize the maximum heights that are permitted right now. And we, there's two ways we can do it. We can modify the maximum height in the primary zones and then add height suffixes to make sure that we achieve that context sensitive form of development and or don't take rights away. Or we can just add height suffixes to the suburban zones to make or modify their exceptions to make sure that they continue to have the right to the 11-meter height that they have right now. So we'll sort out the most efficient way to do that, and we're working on that for draft 2. Issue number 4, conversion of R4 zone to N4 zone. So the R4 zone right now has a wide range of densities, and we call them the R4 junior zones. So those are the R4A up to about R4L, and a few other R4 zones that permit a maximum of 4 units in an apartment building. And that's really more akin to 4 units as a minimum. You could say that we're proposing to permit that in the N1 right now. And so we really figured, well, you know what, our level of resolution of how we handled the N4 zones probably wasn't as detailed as it should have been. And we're looking at taking some of those junior R4 zones, and instead of converting them into an N4 zone that does not have a density limit, so you'd be going from 4 units to a zone that does not have a density limit, does not have a maximum number of units per lot, we're thinking that perhaps we may take those areas down to N3. And they'll still be in an apartment zone, but that's a smaller delta, a smaller change between the status quo and what's proposed in draft 1. So we're going through this process of trying to, sort of ground truthing and doing some pruning and modifications to smooth out some of these issues that are being identified through the public consultations. So for issue number 5, neighborhood zones, we've had comments from the public about inconsistent distribution of density. Okay, so what they've noticed is that in certain neighborhoods, if you compare neighborhood by neighborhood in terms of their proximity to transit stations and so on, there are certain neighborhoods, they share all of the same characteristics with another neighborhood in terms of this, straight up implementation of official plan policies. But the zones that were assigned are denser in some areas than they are in others. And there's a correlation, like people were saying, well, it looks like in these less affluent neighborhoods, you haven't upzoned them that as much. And they're saying you purposefully did that. You're putting all the density in the less affluent neighborhoods. And that's not fair. And what they've observed is absolutely right, but it's not as a result of a purposeful strategy on our part to try and, load up the density in less affluent neighborhoods and put lower densities in affluent neighborhoods. The difference or how this happened was a result of how the zone codes were converted. So basically, the less affluent neighborhoods had a higher density or a higher zone to start with than the affluent neighborhoods. And so they went up to say N4, and then the affluent neighborhoods went up to N3, even though they were R1. So they went R1 to N3, and then the less affluent neighborhood maybe went from R3 to R4. But from an official plan perspective, they're the same distance from a transit station. And so we're really trying to take a look at that and apply, take a step back, look at the process that we used, look how it rolled out. Is that really what we intended? Is that really, I don't want to use the word fair, but is it an effective implementation of official plan policies? Or is it just, a sort of mechanical conversion that happened without proper consideration of the result? So we're trying to give the zoning map that proper consideration instead of just, saying, okay, we plugged in this conversion exercise, that's it, that's what it is. No, to do a proper job, you have to then take a step back, consider, the official plan policies, and just decide whether you need to do some sort of sculpting to try and make sure that you have an equitable and, sort of consistent application of official plan policies. So that's issue number 5. And then issue number 6 is the building height transition framework. And staff have added this as an issue ourselves, because for us, it's a big deal. We have heard from some residents and some members of the development industry about the height transition provisions, but not a lot. And so I think for the general public, the height transition provisions, perhaps they don't, the significance of them is just a little bit, it's just a little bit too far flung from their experience to realize the impactfulness of them. So regardless, this is a key issue that staff want council to weigh in on in terms of the directions in the draft zoning bylaw. And so we are creating options for height transition for that issue. And if I should have really explained what height transition means. So there are height transition provisions in, for example, Main Street zones where they abut a low-rise zone, where they abut a zone that's a neighborhood zone N1 to N4, where the maximum height is 4 stories or less. And so the zoning bylaw builds in height transition from those low-rise zones to basically get the building to sculpt upwards in height with the distance that it is away from that lot line with the neighborhood zone. So there are many, many ways to achieve height transition. There are many decisions to be made about what is your maximum upset height, and where are the break points for when you get to go from lower, from a podium to the tower portion of the building for a high-rise development. So that's what the height transition framework is about. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of the height transition strategy. These diagrams were in the IPD. And so we've just illustrated, several options. And actually within each of these options, there are sub-options that are sort of spoken to in the IPD. So this is the way we could write the provisions. We could have, a stepped approach, or we could say, as in option 1, in option 2, that would allow the building to basically be constructed anywhere underneath that black line in option 2, and the same goes for option 3. So next slide, please. So reached the end of the presentation. If you want further information about the new zoning bylaw, I really encourage you to go to our Engage Ottawa page. There is a lot of information there for you. And from there, you can access the draft text of the zoning bylaw and the zoning map. And all of the supporting materials. So we're ready for questions. If you'd like, we can take the slide down, and that was a lot. So if you
Thank you very much, Carol. Appreciate that presentation. I know you in particular, but your whole team have been doing a lot of heavy lifting on this comprehensive zoning bylaw exercise. So thank you very much for that. Are there any questions from members? You can just put your, and I see any hands up. Okay, Colin, why don't you go ahead, and then Anna, I think, and then Jason. Colin, do you want to go ahead? And we'll see how many questions we have, but we'll try basically try and keep it to about 5 minutes, and then we'll go to the next person, and we can always circle back. Colin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Carol, for that comprehensive presentation on the new zoning bylaw. Just I have a couple of questions. They're actually concerns that I have with respect to development, particularly in suburbia. I noticed in reading the report that was given to Planning Committee, I think it was November 24th or 25th, there was an item, an issue identified, and I think you brought it up in your presentation, the driveways in the villages, driveway dimensions and widths. I noticed in that report that I'm referring to that there's a statement that the existing zoning bylaw stipulates a maximum driveway width of 50% of the lot width for all residential zones, including villages and rural residential zones. I'm wondering what the new bylaw specifically is contemplating for dealing with driveways in suburbia in particular. I know that there were some, I thought they were rather complicated suggestions in an earlier draft with respect to permissions for parking in front yards. Is, from reading that report, is it the intent now that it's going to be simplified to the provision going to be simplified to a lot width or maximum width of a driveway at 50% of any particular lot in both, not only in the village situations, but in suburbia as well? I know you mentioned that there's a problem with compact built form and on-street parking and the availability of on-site, on-lot parking in many of these subdivisions. It's a major, quite frankly, I think it's a major problem in suburbia right now with things like encroachments on parking, encroaching on sidewalks, people widening driveways, essentially paving their whole front yards, problems with snow removal for municipal, the municipal fleet, and also for the private property owners. Can you tell me what direction the bylaws, the new bylaws going in terms of providing for necessary off-street parking in particularly in these subdivisions with the compact built form and the recent subdivision as compared to the subdivision that I live in, which is in Old Barhaven, where quite frankly there are no on-street parking issues simply because the lots are big enough, driveways are wide enough to be able to accommodate parking on the lot.
Yeah, I think there are the provisions in the bylaw currently. There are standards there, but they get varied through ZBAs or through OLT or OMB decisions. So to less than, so to an even more permissive standard to allow, narrower lots, narrower or smaller front yard setbacks. And it's in, for example, so that there isn't even room for a parking spot in tandem in the driveway leading to a garage. And it's in those subdivisions where those standards have been varied to that extent that we're seeing the worst problems in villages. I'm talking about villages. In suburban subdivisions, I'm trying to recall the exact provision, but I don't believe that a driveway is permitted if the lot is less than 6 meters wide. And then beyond that, you have to maintain the maximum width of the driveway is 50% or 3 meters wide. And then you need to get to a certain lot width to have a double wide driveway. Apologies, I can't remember exactly what that is. I mean, as developers or as builders experiment with different forms, built form with different lot sizes, where you do start to see there's a little bit of a canary there in the coal mine, where you do start to see the problems getting to be worse. And so it's like there's the standard in the bylaw, and then there are the standards that are approved as a part of a ZBA for a plan of subdivision. So there's no way around it. The more compact the form, the bigger the tensions are between all of the things that you mentioned. And right now, I mean, we have a strong direction in the official plan to maintain that space for trees. And we're receiving a lot of comments from the public about, or from environmental groups in particular, about requiring a 6 meter front yard setback across the board to facilitate growth of trees in front yards. And I mean, that also makes room for trees, but it does have a double sort of benefit for that 6 meter front yard setback, of which I think is quite common in our standards in the new bylaw for those larger lots. So, or sorry, for in the suburbs. So Colin, like, I can't get into, I wish I could, if I had the bylaw right now, I could really dig in and just talk to you about details, but you'll have to forgive me, right? For I don't have everything right in my head right now about all of the standards that you've mentioned. But suffice to say, you've highlighted this is a tension and development that's been ongoing for many years. Yeah.
Exactly what you're talking about. Again, as far as trees go in front yards, there's also the constraint that's provided by what happened in the 80s and 90s, where subdivision design went to front yard servicing for bell, cable, water, everything is now going in a front yard location. So you're not only constrained by the compact form of the lot, compact size of the lot, you're constrained by the fact that you've got all of this underground junk that interferes with tree planting as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And in some parts of the city with the clay soils, it's even more of a tension. Yeah.
Well, I did have another question about, if I may, Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go to Member Link after you. Thanks.
Thank you. Question about the provision for stormwater management on in developments that are not subject to site plan control. I'm assuming that deals with severance applications to the Committee of Adjustment for lot creation. Is that correct?
No, it deals with building permit. So it is not, those provisions are not triggered by a Planning Act application. It is a matter of compliance with the zoning bylaw before building permit can be issued. You have to demonstrate that you've got, your pre and post storm flows are unchanged.
But isn't that dealing with the horse after the cart? Because the lot creation is, I mean, once you create a lot, there's a right to develop. If it's an issue of stormwater management, and I'm thinking of a particular area that I dealt with when I was on the Committee of Adjustment. That's St. Clair Gardens and City View, where there have been major problems with stormwater, flooding events, and all these things that
Right.
were
Yeah.
as a result of intensification and doubling of density in that neighborhood. And I was a dissenting member of the Committee of Adjustment on most of those applications because I was well aware of the problems from a historical perspective over the years working in the PN at the time with the flooding issues that we had to deal with 25 and 30 years ago. So I have a hard time understanding.
Colin, these are detailed calculations based on a certain proposed development with its lot coverage and the amount of permeable surface. And so these are like engineering calculations that need to be done to confirm, if the pre and post is changing, that you've got retention mechanisms. So I'm not saying that stormwater management conditions couldn't be imposed on, a consent application. Apologies. What I was trying to say is that stormwater management assuming that it's approved by council and comes into effect, you have to comply and with the requirements in the zoning bylaw. You have to submit as a part of your building permit application, information concerning how what your retention methods are, whatever, for the proposed development to ensure that the pre and post flows are the same. And the city's, is part of the infrastructure master plan, and there's an implementation project underway right now to ensure that the procedures are in place once the new zoning bylaw comes into effect, that when building permit applications come in, that there are the trained staff there to evaluate the submissions. Oh, Stan's here. That would be wonderful. I didn't realize Stan was here.
Sure, if I could just add, so in terms of the members' questions about creation of a lot with stormwater management, most of this would be stormwater retention through a storage, whether the primary mechanisms would be rooftop storage or underground storage in either the rear and or the front yards as well. So, if we're looking at a lot creating a lot, in two-dimensional space, we're looking at that water storage really occurring within the third dimension, either on the roof or underground.
So that's what's happening now. That new lots being created are subject to those restrictions or those requirements, as opposed to when I served on the committee of adjustment, and that was not a requirement, and their lot creation was creating major problems that were identified in the study that was done by the city in 2022.
So Chair, if you would hope that through that consent application and or the minor variance application, that the ultimate outcome of multiple dwellings would be part of the application, and then that would actually be that would trigger a review, and the applicant would be able to work with staff to find what would be some solutions prior to that lot creation. A lot of this, though, also comes into place where there is no consent application or minor variance application. So you just have a standard lot and there's no process to look after stormwater management without site plan control. So we're really looking at the building permit process. So if there's a minor variance application or consent application beforehand, that's great. That provides the applicant with some additional time to work with staff. Could be building code staff, but they would retain their own engineer and look at if what they're proposing is feasible with the mechanisms, again, for that storage, either on the roof or underground.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Link.
So when you mentioned the parking rates in Richmond and the villages, I was a little confused because you had said that there would not be minimum parking standards, and surely that's an issue in other parts of the city as well. It's not just a residential issue, it's also commercial spillover. So why rural areas in particular?
Well, rural areas have, in terms of a number of reasons, actually. I mean, their transit service is not what other parts of the city have. Those communities are a lot more car dependent than other parts of the city. So it's prompted by that particular situation in these villages that are very still car dependent.
Member Link, did you have a follow-up to that? Or if not, I'll go to Member Burgraff. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Well, first and foremost, thanks, Carol, for going through all this info and actually rather succinctly, considering the scope of work that's there. So I much appreciated. Two quick questions and then maybe one more of an open one, hopefully. For when draft 2 comes out, will it be possible to see like a redlined version from draft 1 to draft 2? Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do it in track
Oh,
changes.
yay.
Yeah, you won't have to struggle to see what's different.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we'll have notes in our note column that says we did this because of this.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you. You mentioned almost at the end about with the issues on the IPD that you wanted, or staff wanted council to weigh in on those options to give, direction on how to move forward. What's the process for that, or the time frame for that? Like, is it through planning and housing, or is it going, like, and if so, what's the time frame you want kind of that direction?
I'm anticipating that when we present the report in March of 2025 to joint committee and then to council, that the councillors are going to take that opportunity to weigh in and make motions to choose whichever option and make their case for whichever option that they think is the best one. And I'm hoping that the information we provide in our report will help them to have informed discussions about those options. And then we'll take that, we'll take that direction, and then I'm hoping that we will then have time to incorporate the directions they've given us into the draft, and then we'll do our formal circulation based on those directions, that revised draft that based on the directions that council has given us at joint committee and council. We'll then circulate our statutory circulation for 28 days, that document. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And then the last one, was I was wondering if you were able to touch on maybe some of the public comments about non-residential uses in neighborhoods. And I don't want to say, I don't want to predispose whether those comments were good, bad, or whatever. So maybe I'll ask you maybe just to, if you could touch on kind of what you guys have heard about that, about those.
Yeah, for sure. So we heard from both sides. We heard people saying, oh, I would love to have, a coffee shop in my neighborhood. Where could it go? And then we heard people saying, well, I don't want that, like I don't want that as my neighbor. And so we heard both sides. And, it's like pretty classic. People want these 15-minute neighborhood uses, but not necessarily next door to them. And I think, in the zoning bylaw, the probably the most efficient tool to introduce those 15-minute neighborhood uses is the lowercase c suffix, but it means us identifying specific properties. And that's it's going to be someone's house that we're going to, and so it's a really difficult thing to try and navigate. I think what we might do is make it a zoning study project in 2026 to try and look for ways to have more of the non-residential uses in neighborhoods and bring amendments, following approval of the new zoning bylaw, because we just can't, we're just juggling every policy, direction in the provincial planning statement and the official plan, and to try and give proper attention to, adding more lowercase c or expanding the CM zone, say for corridors where people think, oh, well, you could put it there and you didn't put it there. That's really, we'd love to hear that. It's just that we're not sure we can manage to get all of that done next year.
Yeah, no, fair.
Yeah.
Okay. And sorry, maybe a B to that question. Apologies. Apologies for my ignorance, because I don't recall it if it's there or not. The things you will be able to do in your neighborhood or in your like the types of businesses you'll be able to run in your house. Is that an exclusionary list in terms of here are the things you can't do, or an inclusionary list of here are the number of things that you can do, but it's limited to kind of this?
It's not an exclusionary list. We actually tried all different ways. We were thinking, oh, should we start listing the things? They were just like, no, it's not going to work because inevitably we'll miss something. So it's basically the same approach as in the current bylaw where, it says you can have a home-based business. It's limited in size. Basically, the impacts are limited by the size that's permitted. And then there are the general provision at the beginning that says it can't be it can't be a nuisance because of odors or noise or, not anything noxious. So that's the way those provisions are written, and we're carrying forward with that because quite simply we couldn't think of anything better. It's a tough thing to regulate. So
totally, and that's why I really appreciate that, Carol. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Member Sun.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I just know 2024 PPS provincial planning statement just in place. I think I read somewhere the next year for the current official plan will have the peer review. So I'm just wondering, these two, the new policy and potential amendment to a current official plan would reshape the current zoning bylaw work or have big impact on the new zoning bylaw draft.
Okay, I think your question was, we've got this new provincial planning statement and the official plan is going to have to be updated, and how are we handling that from the zoning bylaw perspective? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, there's been a lot of legislative changes, and now the PPS again modified. So we're doing our best to be in conformity with it. That's our test. I think, we can anticipate. It's clear what the provincial planning statement is saying. Perhaps Royce would like to jump in and talk about what's planned for next year.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. So we're looking at two pieces in 2025 to update the official plan to be in conformity with the PPS. One is just a high level review of just policies, sort of what quick wins we can make in the official plan within the first quarter or two, and then about mid-year we're looking at doing something more substantial, but more related to the growth and converting the Ministry of Finance population projections into housing and employment. For the zoning bylaw itself, we're also looking at other elements of the PPS that may have changed, such as definitions for areas of employment and what does that mean for industrial areas, and how we're going to go about zoning and providing the permitted uses associated with those slight tweaks that the 2024 PPS brought.
Thanks, Royce.
Great, thank you. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. I'll just take the opportunity to say, with respect to Jason's question, that in March, we'll receive the second draft of the zoning bylaw. At that point, I'm encouraging my colleagues to bring motions if they want to start being prescriptive. We all kind of made a commitment when this was first tabled to let it go out for discussion. We've all received a lot of feedback from all the various different stakeholder groups. In March, if there is, and I'll just use a theoretical example, but something that's sort of easily grasped, I think. Let's say the suburban councillors are dead set against the removal of parking minimums and want to maintain parking minimums. I'm going to suggest that March would be a good opportunity for them, if the draft comes back with no parking minimums, to put a motion forward to try to prescribe that by the time it gets to the final draft, it has the parking minimums restored. I'd vote against that, and it's just a theoretical example, but you know, I think in March we want to have some of the big picture issues. If councillors feel really strongly, I believe that we should be starting to be prescriptive with staff in March, so that they don't get to September, October, and have a million different motions in front of them to change the draft bylaw. If council feels really strongly about a direction in which we want to go, and the draft bylaw is not going there in March, I'm going to encourage my colleagues to try to be more prescriptive earlier rather than later. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, that's yeah, thank you for that. Are there any other, I have a number of questions, but is there anyone else before I jump in, I guess? Okay, so maybe I'll just, so just a couple of kind of, I guess, maybe processy type questions or comments. The As We Heard It report, it provides a summary of resident feedback captured in, I guess, the in-person consultations, but I'm just wondering again, I suppose, where the equivalent As We Heard It report is for industry feedback, and does the city support the idea when it talks about the As We Heard It report, about getting feedback and sharing that feedback from all stakeholders, not just residents? I know it's a topic that we've raised before, so maybe I'll just get your comments.
Tim, it looks like Tim's got his mic off and he'd like to respond. Tim, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we've been releasing As We Heard It reports when we're able to. We would normally release it with the second draft, but with these IPDs, that's given us an opportunity to release As We Heard It's early. So we will be doing a comprehensive As We Heard It report for draft 2, including all the things like emails that we haven't got to. We've done some emails so far. In the September one, we'll get a copy on that. We have the in-person open workshops that we still need to release the As We Heard It for, and then also the As We Heard It comments and discussion that we've had with industry and also different community associations. So there's still a lot of As We Heard It work that we're working on right now and getting prepared in anticipation for the second draft coming out in March.
Okay, that's
thank
great.
you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
It's many hours of transcribing information. So it is. So when Tim said we've been sending them out when we're able, we've been sending them out when they are transcribed and translated and converted into a PDF. And so it's a process, and we don't have 6 people to work on this. So right?
I know,
Yeah.
I realize that, and I appreciate how much work it is. And I know I've raised this before, and I'll continue to raise it, I guess. Because I think it's so important for residents to hear from, and typically I'm talking about industry really, to hear what industry's, concerns are, so that we can try and build understanding of those concerns. I think it's very important for residents to be able to see what the concerns are. We're talking about zoning bylaw that in many ways is all about meeting our growth management plans and intensification. How do we get there? We need to encourage the development industry to build. At the end of the day, I think it's really important that residents have a clear understanding of what the barriers are from industry's perspective, and then we can talk about them, as opposed to sort of talking over or at each other, but not really talking with each other. Anyway, so enough said on that. What is you mentioned earlier, you talked about staff's timeline for responding to written comments. And just to clarify, because for my own, I had written on behalf of my own community association. I don't think we've had a response yet. So I'm just wondering when I might expect to hear back. And again, I know I can only imagine the avalanche of comments that you've been having to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, we're receiving comments that are a dozen pages long.
Yeah.
And so something like that is going to take a team of people to respond to. And then, we may get, could be 2 or 3 of those, a day. It's and sprinkled in here and there, like many, others, single question comments. So I'm not sure when. I'm trying to recall when we received your comments. I know that as a team, staff are doing their best to right now finish their draft provisions. We just actually, our internal deadline for our draft provisions was just within a few days ago. And now staff are switching to getting their contributions to the report ready. So, responding to community associations is well, apologies, but third on the list, because we have to meet our timelines for our deadlines for getting that draft ready so that we're delivering a zoning bylaw to joint committee in March. So staff are juggling a bunch of things right now. I'm not sure when the glebe one will be ready. I think, Tim, do you have any intel on that one? It's time.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to make this about my particular, I'm asking the question more general, because I assume there are others that are, so I'll say sort of outstanding as well. And I think it sort of matters because based on the response received, depending on I'll say how strongly people feel about whatever issue that they've been raised, depending on the response received, it'll also provide some indication of if staff say, well, we're hearing this, thank you for raising this, and give an indication that there might be some movement on it, then we'll hopefully let you do your work to a certain extent and not bug you because you've got lots of work to do.
Yeah, I will say that we are much more caught up now than we were a month ago, and Tim can provide details.
Yeah, through the chair, we have about 10 community association submissions that we're still working through. Yeah. They're very detailed and takes a lot of staff work. We've had internal deadlines that have taken, these take days to work on, and they take multiple staff. And so we have encouraged community associations to break them up to help us submit. But we accept them however they are. But I think we've tried to communicate to community associations that these big bulky ones do take a lot of time to work through. We are working through them. I have, we remind planners to continue working on them. They're all in draft to some stage or another, but we do and have tried to make as comprehensive of comments that we receive as we can. We do take them seriously. And as a consequence, the level of detail that we aspire to does take some time. And so that's why they continue to be worked on. But I have a list I follow every week to see how we're getting through them. And, we're hoping to use the Christmas, the winter holidays as a breathing room to try and get more caught up in these. But we do appreciate that there's been about up to a month lag with some of these, and we're trying to do them as quickly as we can, as with the level of detail that we know community associations expect.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. My next, I guess, comment, and it kind of relates to, I guess earlier this year, the city had brought forward a draft monitoring report for the official plan. I'll just note that our overall goal, as we all know, is to become the most livable mid-sized city in North America. But we don't actually appear to have a specific and measurable definition of livability. So I'm not sure how we'll actually have an idea if we're making progress towards that goal without that. And I guess, and I mention this because I think the idea of having clear goals and being able to measure progress is also important to the success of the zoning bylaw. That, I think the city quite rightly has identified 15-minute neighborhoods as really a key focal point for achieving Ottawa's overall livability goal. Intensification being a very important part of that picture, in my view. But we don't seem to have identified or defined clear outcomes for 15-minute neighborhoods. In terms of measures of success, how we will measure that, and then linking it to the zoning bylaw, and in turn then the official plan. So I'm just wondering, should we not have a plan to measure the impact of the zoning bylaw on neighborhoods and the components that make them livable? Really to ensure that while achieving intensification and housing objectives, we're also matching, I'll say, promises made regarding important 15-minute neighborhood elements that keep up and make Ottawa highly livable, as we say our overall goal is. I think it's a matter of keeping these elements developing and also in balance. But how will we know if we're succeeding in this area if we haven't defined success? How will we know when we're not, so we can course correct before it's too late? So I would just want to sort of park that idea, having acknowledged, and we just had a discussion about how you're just trying to keep up with comments and incorporate everything else. But I just sort of want to park that idea here, and because I think it's important that we can really measure the impact of. We can do all sorts of things with zoning, but at the end of the day, I would say if one of our key objectives obviously is to see housing built, and housing doesn't get built, what do we do then? How do we course correct, and how will we know, and how will we know when we've in the alternative, when we've got perhaps too much in a given neighborhood, too much development or too much focused development, and amenities and those 15-minute neighborhood elements are not keeping up.
I'm going to jump in, and I think then Royce, because this is quite properly an official plan question, but we are thinking about monitoring. It's something that I'm thinking about including in the draft 3 report. But from a zoning perspective, it's more about monitoring how the zoning bylaw is performing, in the sense that, can it be clearly understood? Are there, are the provisions achieving the intent of the official plan? Like, do they need to be modified so that they are, or rewritten so that they're more efficient in achieving official plan policies? For us, it's a much more technical exercise. It's really the official plan that sets the directions. And I know that there are, Royce can speak to the whole monitoring piece about the official plan. But for us, monitoring the zoning bylaw is really about making sure that the errors are corrected, that we're efficiently implementing the official plan. And so that means continuous omnibus reports and just continuous work to refine the zoning provisions if there's problems with implementation, or they can't be implemented, or they can't be enforced. Those are technical aspects. And I should now pass to Royce to speak to the higher level issue, which is, I think, what you're really talking about.
So, Chair, some of these things that we care about, such as more housing, livable communities, they're incredibly complex. They have multiple actors and multiple variables involved that exceed what the zoning bylaw or the official plan can do, right? So, for example, one of the ideas you want to park with us would be if we have too many dwellings within one area, right? What does the zoning bylaw do about that? But the zoning bylaw is only one aspect of that, just in terms of permission or opportunity. That permission opportunity could be somewhere else, yet there's not enough or not the same level of development there. And that's because there are other forces going on that's beyond the municipality's control to influence, right? Because we do, after all, live, most of us, it is a free market economy, right? And when the zoning bylaw does provide opportunities and tries to provide regulations to one point, but in terms of supply and demand versus those opportunities, that's more of a market thing. And it's the same thing for striving to become the most livable community in North America. Is it's not just the official plan, it's not just the zoning bylaw, right? There are other aspects that a municipal services can provide, but it also goes beyond that. What is the business community doing? What is tourism doing? What the federal presence, particularly in Ottawa, they have an influence on where offices go or that workforce, and just even drawing the workforce to our community, and then what that community would then desire from that. So same 15-minute neighborhoods, right? 50-minute neighborhoods is, again, the zoning bylaw and official plan provides those opportunities, but for the private sector to build on that, they will have to come to the table, and it takes time to do that, right? So we have that 50-minute neighborhood report that we did a few years ago, and that was a baseline report, and it does two things to measure how we are in terms of 50-minute neighborhoods. One is looks at proximity services. It includes sort of businesses, but also other services, including parks and in schools. Again, those are multiple actors that is more than just the city or any one stakeholder. And also, what is the state of our pedestrian connections to those services from where one lives to where any of those services are, and are they safe? Are they attractive? Right? And that's much more subjective in terms of trying to develop that. So we have sort of a quantifiable component in terms of how many services there are to any given point where someone lives in the city, and then those pedestrian connections, and you put those together, and then you sort of have this sort of feeling towards how is an area, how does it score in terms of being a 15-minute neighborhood community. And even our best examples they can always evolve, they can always do better in terms of those connections, for example. And there's other areas that have good connections, but they could do more in terms of services, right? So these are things we're trying to measure, but it's not just any one actor. It's not just the zoning bylaw that implements it. It provides the opportunities, but there's a much longer story to how that development, how those services evolve over time.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I mean, obviously there are a lot of external factors, external variables that the city doesn't have control quite clearly over how neighborhoods are going to develop. The cities don't build houses, developers do, contractors do. City doesn't run, services, private services, cafes, that sort of thing that we, many people, not all people, as Carol said, like to see in their neighborhoods. But that being said, if this is the intent of the city, I think it's important to at least define what we're aiming for, what we're trying to influence, have specific targets for where we want to get to, so that we're trying to do something through the zoning bylaw. And a zoning bylaw is not everything; it's just one tool. But we're obviously trying to influence the development of those 15-minute neighborhoods. And so if we make best effort to come up with policy, zoning, what have you, to get there, and it's not working, and we know it's not working because we haven't reached those targets, then that will tell us that we have to course correct. But if we have to have some marks in the ground, I would say, to be aiming for. Again, obviously, understanding that we don't have control of all the factors at play. So I would encourage us, and that has to, I mean, obviously this is something that must be in sync, has to be in sync with the official plan and and the targets, the goals, the objectives, the outcomes that we're looking to achieve there as well.
So Chair, like again, so that we did a 15-minute neighborhood baseline report to get the scores. We tend to do that again when we have sort of that implement survey data ready, and that gives us an idea where the services are. We can rescore, and then the second part of that report is also what is municipality's role? How can we improve on these areas? And it looks at it by transect as well. And then we can look to see how we've scored or how that scores have changed since that baseline. What have we done as a municipality to impact that, and just revisit some of those points. So I think when we redo that 15-minute neighborhood study, that would be where we'd be looking to see how have we been doing over time and what can we do to increase our 15-minute neighborhoodness, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on, I'm hesitating a bit because it is a bit detailed, and it speaks to the density permissions in the new residential zoning. The draft zoning proposes, as you mentioned, allowing significantly higher residential density at the individual lot level than what's currently targeted in the city's official plan, that table 3B, I think it is, for neighborhood areas. The rationale, as I understand it, is that significantly more density, and I think you mentioned this earlier, Carol, must be allowed to reach average density targets over the next 25 years. But I guess the question is, how much more? And how did those very, I'll say quite large permissions for the N3, and then lifting of permissions for N4, how were those developed? And how will the city ensure that neighborhoods that achieve more density and more residents, again, keep up in terms of complete neighborhood elements? I guess for N3 zone lots, the new limit would allow up to 150 dwelling units per hectare, which is about twice the average residential density target. And for N4 zone lots, the new limit would be 250, or 3 times the target. And I'm wondering how those were developed. Yeah.
Okay, so there is a correspondence between the N1, N2, and 3 zones going up. So that, for example, the N2 is roughly equivalent to the R2 after Bill 23.
Yeah.
N2 6 units, R2 6 units in a semi-detached building. And then, a townhouse development with 8 units in it, after Bill 23 can have 24. So, we're starting to see per building, right? We're not talking about per hectare, we're talking about per building. So we're starting to see densities. If you look at the, under Bill 23, when you compare them to our neighborhood zone framework, there's a lot of equivalency there. The issue is that we've shifted, like what is R1 right now could be going to N1, or it could be going to N2.
Yeah.
So you'd be going from basically 3 units to 6. And it's that delta or that change that is shocking for people. But you were asking, like, honestly, we've been looking at our densities and thinking, well, I wonder if we, based on the feedback and, the potential that's being created, and thinking about context sensitive development and so on, would it be better to try and reduce the number of units or lower the densities? But we are like Bill 23, people think, 3 units per lot, it's a difference, it's perhaps shocking to people. But when you look at the full ramifications of it, especially with the townhouse development, we're into a whole other new world of densities now. And so, asking about, I think people have in their minds, they're comparing pre-Bill 23 permissions and then the new zoning bylaw. And there's actually Bill 23 in the middle, which tripled, it's like Russian dolls or mushrooms basically. So, the densities are higher, but Bill 23, I guess this is why we need to do a better job in communicating our zoning framework and what the reality is after Bill 23. And so we're working on, we've got diagrams and we've been working on refining them to make that message clear to people. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it really is. You talked about wanting to see more housing built. Everybody does. Will it be built even at the densities potential that we're providing? Probably not. Once you get into site plan control, after with 11 units, that's going to be a big disincentive to go over 10. And any given person or property owner who decides to redevelop, they may just decide to redevelop what they and get replace what they've got with what they've got. They don't want to be a landlord, and they don't want to, it's their home. They don't want to. So the zoning is providing potential. Will it be realized in every case? I doubt it. I really doubt it. It's going to be there's going to be a range of densities within these zones, and just as there is now. And I don't know, Royce, if you have any insights you'd like to offer, because this is growth management piece is yours.
Yeah, so that's one of the things with the zoning bylaw is it provides that opportunity, right? But the reality, as Carol mentioned, is that what we call that absorption rate is quite low. We looked over the past 5 years, the number of these sort of gentle intensification type of units, and counted those type of dwellings, and they represented 1% of all the dwellings permitted or issued building permits in the last 5 years. So, we're not talking about an avalanche of these type of units. They do occur, and I can see and understand that some neighborhoods may have more than some other neighborhoods, but as a whole, they really are a low sort of absorption from the overall dwellings that we produce.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and I guess that 1%, and really part of my question is trying to understand the assumptions that have been made when developing these permissions, these much higher permissions, and the assumptions that are being made, and just to use that 1% as an example, it may be a perfectly valid assumption across the city, but I'm fairly sure that in some areas of the city it's much higher. Councillor Leeper, I'm sure, can speak to that. Other areas of the city, it's quite a bit lower, and there's been very little development action. So how do we get those areas that have seen very little action seeing more action? And how do we maybe take the pressure off or do things well in those areas that have seen I don't know if you feel inundated in Kitchissippi ward or how you describe it exactly, but for those wards that have really been doing a lot of the heavy lifting for intensification, how do we manage that? And I'm just not too sure that having an assumption across the city, 1% driving zoning permissions for density across the city.
I wouldn't say that that's the case, Carolyn.
Okay.
That assumption, when we're trying to explain to the public why the per lot densities have to be higher, we have to give them a percentage about the number of units that are turning over. And whether it's, it's actually closer on average to 0.5 in the city than it is, but 1% easier to understand. And yes, it does range, but that's just to give people, to try and give people an understanding about the slow rate of the number of lots that actually do turn over. And that is the basis for the premise for trying to have the densities higher. And once again, those densities do relate to what's permitted under Bill 23 right now. Because we don't want to down zone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if Bill 23 is basically giving us a new floor of permission, permissions, then yes, that obviously, and you know, it would be very helpful to clearly communicate that to people so that they understand that we're no longer, you know, talking, we're not, you know, the discussion of less than that is just not even a relevant discussion to have because this is a new floor. So, and above that, what, you know, what is the city proposing and why? I guess that's, and what are the assumptions that are supporting that, those proposals? Maybe I'll hand it back over to Councillor Leeper, though I see your hand up.
I just wanted to reiterate or help amplify that point, Carol. And one of the things that really causes a lot of pushback in the community is this assertion of a slow absorption rate. And when you take a look at Champlain Park, take a look at Hintonburg, take a look at Westboro, you know, there are multiple projects going on every street, every construction season. So if there is overshoot in the density assumptions, that's going to result in overshoot fairly quickly, I think, in some of those wards that are closest to the LRT in terms of actual units built. I absolutely get it for, I don't know, College Ward or somewhere in the bungalow belt where the new permissions may not result in a quick turnover of properties, right? Especially where there isn't that proximity to the higher order transit. But if we're using overshoot averages to develop target densities in the 15-minute communities in the streetcar neighborhoods, I'm worried that we are going to get to overshoot really quickly on the actual number of units built. And I think Carolyn's right that there needs to be some nuance in terms of, and I thought I'd heard that from staff at some point over the past couple of months that you are cognizant that there is absorption rates vary across the
Oh,
the
yes.
city, but
Yes.
we haven't seen that translated into different formula.
I guess it amounts to the distribution of our, you know, where we're putting N2, N3, N4. I wouldn't, you know, like, is it such a bad thing if more housing is being built in those neighborhoods? Is it a bad thing that the densities are going up? Is it it amounts to, is it a bad thing that there's more housing?
I think that has implications if it has any sort of, if it's creating any assumptions for our master plans in terms of the hard infrastructure that needs to be built to support the growth rates. If we're assuming a slow absorption rate, that has implications for the rate at which we're investing in infrastructure in those neighborhoods. And it's a communications problem as well, right? If we are telling residents in Hintonburg, you know, the absorption rate with new permissions is going to be very slow, they're going to immediately see
I understand.
the challenge with that.
And I think what you're providing, both of you, Carolyn and Councillor Lieber, is it's good feedback for us, certainly. I think what you're saying is there's a nuanced approach that's needed. I'll take it back to the team. I think in communicating that it offends residents if we talk about, or it upsets them and they feel ignored, or they, you know, and angers them if we talk about a citywide average that's much lower in their neighborhood. So I certainly do acknowledge that. Please don't, yeah, like I want to make that really clear.
Transect based might be a better way to talk about those absorption rates.
Yeah, and we do actually have them by transect. So I will take away. I think it's really good feedback for us. And and so just to take it one step further, are you suggesting that you think the densities are too high? Is that the feedback that you're giving, and that you want them to see the densities that are permitted in those zones?
So again, I'll take my cue from the chair and try not to be too parochial in my comments, but the you know, the increased permissions for the N4 in Hintonburg and in Kitchissippi ward with that additional height are probably not necessary if that's where you're going to try to get where you've got some overshoot built in. And I think residents would be happiest if we kept those to the 3-story, and that's something I want to explore, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that we're definitely looking at that.
But in other neighborhoods, where particularly the height limits are proposed to stay the same, some of those N2s in Champlain Park and stuff. No, having overshoot built in so that it gets to be an N2 community or an N3 community sooner than you would have anticipated, except to the extent in which that creates assumptions for our master plans. I'm fine with that. But there are areas where we've seen significant new permissions given that are pushing the envelope of what residents are willing to live with. And if overshoot is built into the assumptions as to why we're adding some of those new permissions, then I have a significant sympathy for the residents and pushing back at that.
Okay. I'm thinking about that, and we'll certainly take away. So you're talking about the areas that have experienced a lot of redevelopment to date, and it's in those areas that you think that the overshoot is too much, that you think that we should be scaling back. I just want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah, and I'm thinking particularly of the areas where you've added an additional story into from the R4 to the N4.
Right. Okay. So are you talking about the overlay?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really good feedback. We can appreciate it. It's the type of thing that that we need to hear so that we can improve the approach to how all of this, this density is going to be handled. And we want to do it in the best way that we can.
Mhm.
Lots of discussion between now and March, but Carolyn, Chair, thank you very much for raising it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just to answer I think your earlier question, Carol, about is housing, do we want, and I'm mangling it already, but is housing, do we want the housing or not? I mean, yes, we want the housing. We can definitely use the density even in my own neighborhood. I personally, I support that. But we're also talking about for neighborhoods, I believe like my own, certainly like those in Councillor Leaper's ward that are already experiencing quite a bit of development. I don't know what the percentage is, but we're already looking at adding population such that the other elements of the neighborhood are not able to keep up. So with the evolving overlay and the densities that are being permitted there, and I go back to my earlier sort of comments on how are we keeping track of this to make sure that that things are being kept in balance, that as we intensify that the other elements of the neighborhood are keeping up as well, because that's when the city, I think, is really at risk of serious pushback from communities when the density comes, the housing comes, but the rest of the neighborhood is sort of like, oh, well, wait a minute. We don't have all these other elements. So
yeah, did you have a suggestion about how the zoning should be modified then? And certain, like are you talking about in the overlay that affects the glebe, or a certain part, like did you have a suggestion about what you thought could be done?
well, I guess without really understanding the specifics of the assumptions, I don't want to make a specific proposal without understanding what the specifics of those
Well, I mean,
assumptions are.
is it the height too? Like, would it be, going down a primary zone, or would it be reducing the height, or?
I think it's less about the height, because I don't see, certainly that hasn't been a discussion that's been raised in any significant way to my understanding. I think it really is about the density, adding a lot more people to this neighborhood, and again, not to focus just on my neighborhood, but on others as well, where there is already a significant amount of redevelopment happening with limited space for parks. And no addition of parks in sight, and limited ability and that's just one example for the city to make those investments, to be able to keep those elements in balance. And I think that's where the city puts itself at risk.
Okay, so you're suggesting then it's the densities permit, the maximum densities in the primary zones that you'd like to see go down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Sorry if I wasn't clear on that from the beginning.
Okay, and in the N3 and N4 or all of the N zones?
No, I think it's the N3 and the N4 in particular. And again, not to focus on my neighborhood, but I've shown slides of, of homes, larger homes, albeit in my neighborhood, which if you were far enough back, you would look at it and you would assume it was a single. On closer inspection, you see 6 doorbells, and it's been split up into, 6 apartments. And some people, might push back from that and say, look, we've already got this in our neighborhood there. And it's not just that one example there. It's not something to be afraid of, I don't think. So we can add that sort of density, but that density on, 6 units on a small, relatively small urban lot is not even close to the densities that we're looking at adding.
So what would you see as a reasonable maximum density per lot in your neighborhood then? Did you have an idea in mind?
I'm not sure that I can give you a specific number tonight, but I'm happy to have a closer look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, but just again, my questions and even comments to the city were more in the form of questions to try and understand what what your analysis was that got you to where you were before making proposals.
Okay. Well,
Right.
though that detailed submission or that submission, we will be getting responses to you on that.
Okay, thanks very much. Sorry for taking all that time. Are there any other questions from other members? No, I don't see any other hands there. Okay, well, I think that I'm going to thank city staff very much. Carol, Tim, Royce, thank you very much for your time this evening and for the presentation. Is the presentation received by the committee at this point? Just a quick nodding of heads is fine, I think. Okay, we'll consider that received. Thank you very much. Okay, so just moving along, are there any notices of motions for consideration at the next meeting? No, seeing none, I'll move on. Are there any formal written inquiries? I don't believe I'd seen any. And other business, is there any other business that members would like to put forward at this point? Oh, sorry, Member White, you had your hand up. Was that on this item or a previous item?
Actually, this item, I guess, Madam Chair, thank you.
Okay, and I'll just say, to my understanding, and Melanie or Robert, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If it's a matter of adding an item to the agenda, we'll just need to get sort of the approval of the committee members informally, if that's what you'd like to do.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a general inquiry that I wonder if at some point in the future could be addressed by a member of staff attending our meeting. I understand that the province has lifted the restrictions on urban boundary expansion applications. I'm not sure if one of the staff members might be aware of that or be able to fill me in on that. But that being the case, I'm just would like to get some information on how the city is addressing these applications, if there are any, and or if there may be some, how they would see these being addressed by staff and planning committee council, considering the general directions of the official plan that I think are pretty contrary to consideration of urban boundary expansions outside of the normal 5-year OP review process. I have heard rumors of a proposal in the area of where I live in the Barhaven area, specifically related to the Cedarview Golf Course area. I'm wondering if that is in fact on the boards, or if an application been received, and if it has, how it's being received and reviewed by the city.
Thank you, Member White. Maybe if I may, just because we're 2 hours into, and I don't want to keep staff any longer into this evening than absolutely necessary. Perhaps if someone wants to give a very brief response to that, if that's even possible, and if not, I'm going to suggest that we push that to the next meeting unless there's if there's some urgency, perhaps we can take that offline.
So
Chair, if
Chair,
I'm, I was just gonna say, just from the clerk's area, there was a report that went to standing committee that I'm sure Roy spoke to, I believe, in the last 2 months that we could, the coordinator could circulate to the members as a starting point. But I leave it to planning staff or Chair Leeper to share, but my recollection is there was a report that we could share.
yes, Chair, I'll try to be brief. So the PPS does make changes to permit expansion of settlement areas outside of comprehensive review. And therefore, that's one of the elements that we have to update our official plan now to be in conformity with the new PPS. A report was brought forward and was adopted by joint committee on December 9th, dealing with settlement area expansions. So that the framework that staff put forward is in that report. We have received applications for settlement area expansions. Many of them, however, are incomplete.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to thank everyone, staff and members, once again for being here this evening. And I think we can move to adjourn. The next meeting date is not actually set, but members will be advised when that information is available. I'll just note that one of the agenda items that we were meant to be discussing and having a look at this evening was the work plan for 2025, and that was not available or ready for the committee at this point. And I understand that will be the subject of a next meeting early to be determined in the new year. So with that, I'll say thanks to everyone for the discussion this evening, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. Have a good night, all.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.